The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 20. It was the light cruiser Cerberus that stood watch over the Ronin planet LO7. Its captain had the ship on high alert. After what had happened to Th-18, Zaharak, and S-10, he wasn't taking any chances. He had the ship's shuttles sweeping the approaches, extending the range of their onboard sensors. It was an ingenious use of the resources he had available, and it allowed him to spot the incoming freighter much sooner than he would normally have. After refusing all attempts at hails, he ordered his crew to blow it out of the sky. The unarmored freighter didn't last long under the withering fire, just long enough to ram what was left of its hull into Cerberus itself. The shuttles could only stand by and watch. 12 hours later, LO7 went dark. "Not taking Bertha with you?" Musashi teased Tango as she hefted a grenade launcher over her shoulder. "She's not really built for Ronin," the blonde sighed, giving her beloved sniper rifle a longing glance. "I could load her up with heap rounds, I suppose, but something tells me I'm going to want something a little heavier when it all goes down." "They're just a bit different than our usual prey, aren't they?" Whisper smirked. He seemed much more jovial since that encounter at the park bench, though Tango still wasn't convinced that was a good thing. "I'm not even taking my knives with me." "Now that's got to be a first," Greybird said in disbelief. Whisper merely shrugged. "Wouldn't do any good, but I still like the idea of having a backup that doesn't run out of ammunition or jam, so—" He reached into crates storing his gear and pulled out a vicious-looking axe, with a short blade on one side of the weapon's head and a cruel-looking spike on the other. "Solid forged titanium," he grinned. "I figure it'll do the job." "I'm glad to see some things haven't changed," Musashi said dryly as Whisper slid the axe into his gear bag. "We about ready?" Tango looked around at the others and nodded. "Looks like it," she said as she picked up her helmet. "Gear up. We should be coming to the release point for the DZ soon." The team finished strapping down their equipment, with each member double-checking the others before Tango was satisfied. "Helmets on!" she ordered, snapping hers into place and locking it down tight as the others did the same. She checked their position on the heads-up display and nodded. "Shuttle is almost in position. 1 minute out. Stand ready." "I'm getting way too old for this," Greybird grumbled, as Tango shot him a look. The four took positions in the shuttle's cargo hold airlock as Tango sealed the inner hatch. 30 seconds out. "Depressurizing." She thumbed the glowing icon for the outer door, evacuating the air before opening the compartment to space. The view was incredible as they looked out over Th-18, but they weren't there to play tourist. 10 seconds. "Stand in the door," she ordered, as they took their positions, as they watched the countdown clocks in their own helmets. When the timer hit 0 and turned red, all four of them jumped out the door. 0.50 kilometers above the planet's surface. The plan was risky enough as it was without alerting every rogue Ronin in the area if they tried landing the shuttle, so they decided on a more subtle approach, even if it was just a tad riskier. Tango watched over the others as they made their descent, their beacons automatically updating her as they put gravity in the driver's seat for the first half of their journey. Other than minor course corrections using the thrusters in their suits, they simply fell, and it was hard not to just sit back and admire the view. She was grinning from ear to ear as the thin air whizzed past her. It had been so long, she'd forgotten what an adrenaline rush it was. She could hear Whisper giggling over the intercom, and for once, she didn't blame him. They'd built up some serious airspeed as the first marker appeared on her scope. Unless they did something about that, all they'd accomplish would be to make 4 small craters in the landscape. Luckily, they had a plan. "Prepare for deployment on my mark," she ordered. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark. At mark, all 4 of them suddenly sprouted wings, carbon nanofiber airfoils attached to their arms and legs. Their screaming death dive began flattening out, giving them lateral momentum in addition to the purely vertical direction they'd been traveling, as they heading for the DZ. It was located in a sparsely populated section of the planet, or at least it had been before the pandemic. Now, no one was completely sure, but it was the best information they had. As they dropped below the final kilometer, they maneuvered for the landing. This was the tricky part of the operation. One miscalculation, and instead of a gentle landing, they'd hit hard enough to break every bone in their bodies. Timing was critical, but for this last procedure, she remained silent. It was up to each of them to choose when and where they would land, and joggling their elbows at a crucial moment could well prove fatal. Instead, she focused on her own landing, pivoting a dozen meters or so off the ground as she engaged the thrusters and retracted the wings. The jets blasted away a whirlwind of dirt and debris as she flexed her knees and touched down, a bit harder than she'd planned on, but close enough. Her grenade launcher was in her hands a heartbeat later as she scanned the perimeter, nodding in satisfaction as one by one the others landed as well. "Status report," she ordered. "Clear. A-OK, I'm good," came back moments later, as they all found spots to hunker down. Greybird already had his scanning equipment up and running, searching for any trace of nearby Ronin. The hope was to find a single, isolated individual, or perhaps a small cluster. Hence the reason they chose a location that could charitably be called the middle of nowhere. If they could bring back just one infected Ronin brain intact, that would hopefully be enough to learn what the Masters had done and reverse it. Though if the opportunity presented itself to grab a few more, Tango had no objection. "Contact!" Greybird suddenly announced. "Got a reading half a click away. Looks like a singleton." "Lead the way then," she instructed him as the team picked up and moved out. Their suits offered some camouflage, but if anyone was looking for them, they'd be spotted easily enough. Get in, get out. That was her mantra. Do the job, then call for the evac. The grassy hill they crested led them to a small group of buildings, some sort of power generation facility by all appearances. Tango's hackles went up immediately. "You still only reading one Ronin?" she asked. Greybird double-checked his equipment. "One is all I'm picking up, but I'm also seeing some interference," he admitted. "It's possible there could be others." "Right," she sighed. "Oh, Whisper, you're on point. Try not to make too big a mess." "Who, me?" He smirked as he slid out his axe and hefted it in his hands. "Trust me, no one will hear a thing." Considering the circumstances, it was probably the best she could hope for. She gave him a nod while the others spread out to cover their flanks as they pressed forward. Greybird checking his readings once again, and pointed at one of the smaller buildings to the left. He sauntered towards the door, slipping inside as he quickly searched the structure. After a few minutes he re-emerged, shrugging at the team. "You sure about those readings?" he asked as Greybird took another look. "Huh. Well, according to what I'm seeing here, there should be a Ronin in that building," he said in confusion. "I guess it's possible." "Look out!" They whipped around to face Musashi, who already had his weapon up and firing. A grenade impacted the Ronin who'd been hiding on the roof squarely in its torso, blowing it apart before it landed on Whisper's back. Their pet lunatic barely moved as bits and pieces rained down on him. "Good catch, Musashi," she said in approval, who gave her a curt nod in reply as he looked around for others. Whisper cast about until he spotted the brain box, heading in that direction to retrieve it when a second Ronin appeared, its metal claws reaching out to rip him to pieces. Without hesitation, the axe was in the air, slashing down to take the head clean off its shoulders. The rest of the machine's chassis, now disconnected, simply fell into a heap. "I thought you said there was only one Ronin," Musashi snapped, as Greybird gave him a helpless expression. They all knew it wasn't an exact science, but as a rule they disliked surprises. Whisper bent down to grab the two separate brains as Tango headed his way with the collapsible container, but let them go when they suddenly erupted in showers of sparks. "Well, that's not good," he mused, towing one with a boot. "Are they supposed to do that?" Greybird was at his side moments later, picking up a brain box and examining it. "It's dead," he said at last, "completely fried." He quickly checked the other one. "They both are." "I thought the Ronin were supposed to be sturdier than that," Tango said in confusion. "They are," the hacker said in worried tones. He plugged a lead into one of the boxes and studied the results. "Not good," he said at last. "What?" Musashi asked. Greybird took a deep breath. "I think they suicided," he said carefully. "It's the only explanation I can think of." "But why would they do that?" Tango asked. "If I had to guess, I think they were programmed to," he pointed out. "I'm guessing the Masters don't want us figuring out how to undo the damage, so they installed a suicide protocol in every infected Ronin. If they're in danger of being captured, they fry out their own brain." Jesus, Musashi said softly. How are we supposed to keep them from suiciding long enough to pick their brains? Man, I don't know, Greybird answered. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Grab the boxes while I call for retrieval, Tango ordered. We'll let the scientists figure it out. And if they can't, Whisper smirked. Tango closed her eyes. Blackout, she whispered. The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 21. Well, Admiral, I am not certain the word audacious does your Operation Bankshot justice, Giage mused, as their combined fleets sat in the outer reaches of the Z's system. Admiral Otsoa merely smiled. The key is keeping the masters off our back while we prepare. So far they've shown no interest in poking their nose this far out, but if they get wind of what we're up to, that'll change. Setting this up is going to take time, but once we get things moving... Her grin grew even wider. Nothing is stopping us. The Diaksh scrutinized the plans once more. So, what do you require from us? For starters, we'll need your engineers, all you can spare. There's a fairly hefty supply list as well, which means shuttles to transport everything. But most importantly, we need a smokescreen. The Konhim leader nodded, idly scratching his cheek. The masters are likely to wonder why we remain in the system without attacking. He considered the problem for a moment. Then I would suggest a series of drills, mock battles between our forces. Let them believe we are preparing for a conventional assault and are using the time to train our warriors. He gave her a smile in return. And in truth, we will require such coordination. While our respective forces fought side by side briefly in the last war, we would be better served if our fleets were truly integrated when the battle comes. I agree, but that does leave us with a rather important question that needs answering, the human said wryly. Who will be in overall command? Giage chuckled. Among my people, the question would be a simple one. We would simply draw blades and see who remains standing. His eyes twinkled with delight as he saw her reaction. I presume your people would object to such an arrangement. Just a bit, she replied somewhat tersely. As it happens, I discussed this possibility with Marshal Fujimoto. Admiral Otsoa sighed. As you are the senior officer in both rank and length of service, and given that Zis is a Konhim world, I am to accept your command. She seemed to be rather less than thrilled by this. Helene always was pragmatic about such things, he chuckled, though she had no greater love of combining forces than you do, Admiral. I gladly accept command of the joined fleet, and appoint you to be my second. The twinkle in his eyes grew positively mischievous. Among the Konhim, the duties of the second include informing the commander when he is in error and, if necessary, removing him from the position. An eyebrow went up at that. And by removing, you mean? The Konhim drew a finger across his throat. Permanently, he grinned. That got a chuckle out of the human. I'm starting to warm to this idea, she smirked. I thought you might. Giage smirked in reply. So, how long until we can proceed? At least a few weeks, she grimaced. But when we're ready and this gets underway, I'll show you why Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a bitch in space. There must be something we can do, Nasat vowed as he looked over the two fried Ronin brains. Some way to prevent them from carrying out their suicidal programming? I don't see how, Greybird replied. The Ronin are resistant to both EMP and electrical shock, and those are the only two ways I can think of immobilizing one long enough to examine it. Commander Chimvois' wings fluttered. You say resistant, he mused. That is not the same thing as immune. Not it's not, the hacker agreed. And if we turned up the juice, we could overwhelm their circuits, for all the good it would do. He sighed unhappily. Because the kind of power you're talking would burn them out just as effectively as their suicide protocol would. There's gotta be another option, Tango growled. What if we dumped a load of wet cement on one or something similar? It'll keep them from running off. It won't keep them from suiciding, Greybird said sourly. Nice try, though. Nasat turned to the human hacker. Is there some way to disconnect their brain from its power supply? He asked. It's internal, he answered. I'd have to open up the brain, and they'd suicide long before I was able to shut it off. Then there are no other options left, Zimvois said quietly. Marshal Fujimoto will order Operation Blackout and murder the entire Ronin race. It's not like she wants to, Tango snapped, but once we lost the quarantine, it became all about self-preservation. Nasat's head came up in a start as he looked at the blonde human curiously. Say that again, he insisted. Tango blinked. Say what again? What you were just saying about the quarantine, he pressed her. She shook her head. All I said was that it's about survival now. No, you said it was about self-preservation, Nasat shot back, as he suddenly got a faraway expression in his eyes. So? Tango snorted. What's the difference? Preservation, he said with a start as he jumped to his feet. That's it. You're not making any sense, Greybird snorted. Nasat pointed to his head. Think about it. If you wish to preserve something, what do? That would depend on what it was I was trying to preserve, Zimvois said after a moment. I might encase it in some sort of protective material, but Greybird has already said that would not work. Freezing, Tango said with a start as she snapped her fingers. That's what you're talking about. The Sorotor bobbed his head excitedly. Exactly. If we were to freeze a Ronin, would that not prevent it from activating the suicide protocol? The human computer expert thought furiously. Maybe, he ventured at last. I mean, without testing it, I couldn't be sure, but I suppose it's possible? He pulled up a file on his workstation and studied it closely. It's not impossible, but... He scrolled to another section and then sighed. Except there's two problems. The first is we'd have to do it fast. Like in less than a second fast. Otherwise, they'd have time to recognize what was happening, and then... Tango nodded. And the second? The second problem is even trickier, Greybird continued. Depending on the temperature, we run a real risk of turning that Ronin brain into a superconductor, which means it will be able to think faster, fast enough to suicide before we can shut it down. I admit, this is all very interesting, Zimvois interjected, but assuming for a moment you were able to find the correct temperature and shut one down, how exactly would you go about that? Drop them into a tank of liquid helium? Wouldn't work, Greybird shook his head. Not fast enough, and at that temperature they'd definitely go superconductor. Another liquid then, Nasat suggested. Nitrogen or hydrogen? The problem is that it takes time to cool something off, he sighed. All those atoms bouncing around, they take time to slow down for this to work. You'd need something like an anti-microwave oven. Greybird's eyes went wide and his jaw dropped. Holy shit, he whispered. That's it. The others in the compartment stared at one another. What is it? Nasat ventured. The hacker ignored him, going back to his workstation and typing away furiously, until finally he finished with a wild flourish as he punched the send icon. Nasat's tablet immediately beeped. The general pulled it out of his tunic and gazed at the data he'd just been sent. What is this? He asked. The answer? Greybird grinned. Get me all of that, and I'll get you your Ronin brain. Nasat perused the data for a moment, before handing it over to Tango. Expedite this immediately, he ordered.